instead of talking about how decentralization should be effective. So why decentralization? Well, let me tell you a little story. I was bitten by the decentralization bug because at the age of 22 or 23, when I just joined the IAS, I had a meeting with Abdul Nazir Saab in Bellary. And he explained then to me, he took the time to explain to a rookie like me that what Karnataka was planning to do, which was later done in 1987, which was to go in for big bang devolution to rural local governments. And he told me very clearly the idea was political, the idea was to also destroy the hegemony of the bureaucracy and in order to ensure that power reaches the people. It was a clear political statement. It was not about improving of services and all that. It was about changing the political reality and how political power was handled in the state. I was lucky enough to be part of that exercise and it hit me completely. And because I realized quite early in surveys that the problems of the state then were so enormous that the bureaucracy, however well-intentioned, could not single-handedly change the scenario. Ultimately, people had to take charge of their schools, their hospitals, their nutrition and other facilities and ensure that they get the best services. And this didn't really do wonders for my career because at every stage I was in these backward jobs, or at least what people considered to be backward jobs. I didn't think that they were bad jobs. And every day one was exposed to some toxic statement by a colleague or by a politician saying that this is never going to happen and so on and so forth. So on one of those days, I met this gentleman who became a good friend. He was working with the World Bank and he was doing exactly the same thing that I was doing in the government in the World Bank. He was trying to push the World Bank, which is a highly bureaucratic and centralized institution, to accept the fact that democratic decentralization is something that they should be doing in different countries. And I asked him what was his life-changing moment. It so turned out that he was a Portuguese gentleman and he was just in his early 20s when the dictatorship of Salazar in Portugal came to a close. And there was a sudden flowering of democracy in Portugal. And at the age of 22 or 23, he became the mayor of Portugal, of Lisbon town. And how it happened was that he was an architecture student who actually went and worked in a slum. He's an elite gentleman who worked in a slum. And by working in the slum, he became so popular that he ultimately was elected as the first mayor. And there was no political talent in the country, considering that Salazar had been in power as a dictator for several decades. So this gentleman was picked up and he was pitchforked into the job of being the mayor of Lisbon. Subsequently, of course, he turned into a career bureaucrat. He joined the World Bank. And he told me one thing, Lis Constantino. He told me that, you know, why he did decentralization? Because he said that it's a wonderful feeling to realize that you're not wanted any longer. I can just walk into the sunset. I know that what I've done has given power to people and I can relax. The sad part is that Lis Constantino is now relaxing. His last posting was in East Timor, where I also used to work. So I met him there. From East Timor, he bought a yacht at a cheap price. He sailed the yacht, braving Somalian pirates and so on and so forth, to a port in Lisbon. And he's now sitting in some rural area in Portugal, growing wine and enjoying himself. And what am I doing? I'm waking up in the morning in Whitefield at 3 a.m. in the morning because BWSSB gives me water at 3 a.m. And my entire mood swings. And the fact that we only have one child is because my wife is always fretting about whether the BWSSB is going to supply water today. So there's absolutely no time for any romance whatsoever. But of course, dysfunctional government services have their good points. My mother, who passed away last year around the same time, she passed away on September 1st, was a shade below 103 years old. And every year, some government department would mess with her. They would either increase her property tax or backbill her for BWSSB. And that had tremendous effect on my mother. It would clear her arteries, improve her blood circulation. She would curse all of us because the misfortune is that she had 6 children, out of which 4 were in the IAS. So all of us used to get a mouthful, but you did this, and you did that, and you didn't do this, and look at what's happening. So I would hope and pray which department is going to mess around with my mother. And every year on queue, it was either the BWSSB or the BBMP or the BESCOM or somebody else would mess up. And that actually, I think, extended my mother's life by a good 20 years. So dysfunctional government services have their benefits. But not everybody would like to be like my mother or like my wife or like me. We would like to enjoy ourselves. I think it's important that we should all retire and we should take government services for granted. I mean, if you look at some of the best and the happiest countries in the world, and I happen to teach in one of them, which is Switzerland, they don't fret around with the government. Conversation when you go for an evening meal with somebody is about art and culture. It's not about whether water supply came or the sewage pipe got blocked. And yet, this is what our lives have become. This is what families come around, right? And this is exactly the kind of mahal that we are bequeathing to our next generation. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it's going from bad to worse. And every morning these days, I just don't even read the newspaper because it's just not worth it. I mean, you open the newspaper, and bad language is not good for your health in the morning. You can't say many things. So that's why we need democratic decentralization, so that we can enjoy ourselves, we can lead happy, creative lives, and we can retire. And things can run like clockwork. Now, how do we plan to do that in India? We pass laws. Now, regarding laws, a decade back, another good friend, Land Pritchett, wrote this paper called The Flailing State. I wonder if you've read this paper, The Flailing State, in which he described India as being quite proficient in doing things that require compliance to certain protocols. Like, for example, we do conduct elections, we do deliver posts, we do a lot of those things where people just have to follow instructions. But we do things badly when it involves an element of discretion and involves multiple numbers of people. So we don't get our education system right, we don't get our health system right, we don't do small things which have to be done at the local levels because our decentralized administration is just not capable of exercising discretion. He also points out another paradox where he says that at the same time India produces good laws where discretion is used, but it's used by a few numbers of enlightened people. And he pointed out to India's record in the constitution making or in legal provisions and so on and so forth. So I don't agree with Land as of today, because I think Indian laws are typically written in a verbose manner with plenty of rhetoric, and they're poorly implemented, but they're badly written. And going by the evidence of this draft bill, I think that Land is wrong. At least, certainly, he's not been right about how laws have been written in the past decade in this country. Now, there are certain design elements in the current draft of this law with which I concur and I appreciate. And I will come to that at a later point. But the overall feeling that I get is one of disappointment. This is because if it becomes law, as Katyani said, will leave both the letter and the spirit of the 74th Amendment of the Constitution and truly killed and buried. I'm amazed at who has come up with this draft, honestly. There can only be two conclusions, and both of them are sinister, which I can draw. First, that those who drafted this document have been completely unaware of the existence of the 74th Amendment. Or second, they were well aware of it and went ahead with a cold-blooded intention of subverting the 74th Amendment. Now, why has this happened? And what are the inherent contradictions that underlie this very sly approach at urban centralization? I think the reason lies in the political economy of Karnataka. And here I'd like to draw attention to a significant paradox about Karnataka's approach to democratic decentralization. Karnataka has been a pioneer in democratic decentralization in rural areas from the days of Ramakrishna Hegde and Abdul Nazir Saab. Even though there was strong political resistance from MLAs who did not wish to see their informal hegemony over their political ranks diluted, nobody, not a single MLA, overtly attempted to sabotage democratic decentralization in rural areas. They might whisper to you, saying idella madabardu, but they could not actually stand up and say from a public forum that they oppose Gram Sabhas, Gram Panchayats, and Zilla Parishds. And while there were times in Karnataka where there was pulling back of rural decentralization and stagnation, the law was constantly reviewed. There were at least 2 attempts to pull back very badly. And those drafts were drafted by not by politicians but by bureaucrats. Horribly regressive amendments which took away all the powers of the panchayats were proposed. On both occasions, the draft did not come to fruition. And I think that should be very encouraging for us. Of course, on both occasions, the government fell also. So we created a big story saying, because politicians are very superstitious. So he said, Nodi, Panchayat Raj Act and then touch ಮಾಡಿಬಿಟ್ರೆ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಸರ್ಕಾರ ಬೀಳುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ನಾವು ಒಂದು ಬ್ಯಾಡ್ ವಾಸ್ತು ಒಂದು ನಾವು ಕ್ರಿಯೇಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ವಿ. So it did not happen. Although the law was constantly reviewed. In 1993, it was reviewed to include the imperatives of the 73rd Amendment. In 2002, it was reviewed by my minister and my mentor, Mr. M.I. Gorpade. It went through a select committee, and I can tell you that it emerged stronger after going through a select committee. Many amendments were suggested because we picked and chose people onto the select committee who were actually progressive and cutting across all party lines. So there are party champions for decentralization in all the parties in Karnataka. 47 amendments were made, and that is the time in 2002 when we created ward committees, ward sabhas, and gram sabhas, a two-tier mechanism of consultation, because Karnataka has 22,000 villages, but only 5,600, now 6,300 gram panchayats. So at the gram panchayat level, if you have a gram sabha, it becomes too large and unwieldy. So we created the concept of area sabhas, which was only then tried only in Kerala. We were the second state to do it, and we adopted it. Again, subsequently, in 2016, under the leadership of the present law minister, when he was rural development minister, we undertook a series of amendments. It was a Ramesh Kumar committee was constituted. I happened to be a member of the Ramesh Kumar committee. It had champions from all parties in it. It was piloted through the assembly. MLAs rumbled and made noises, but not a single MLA stood up and opposed it. And the act today, I can say, arguably, is on paper one of the strongest statements of democratic decentralization in rural areas. In fact, I tell my friend from Kerala, Mr. Vijayanand, who's a champion there and again a mentor of mine, that as far as the legal statement goes, as far as financial architecture goes, Kerala is better. But as far as the legal statement goes, Karnataka's legal statement on Panchayati Raj is one of the strongest in the country. So what really is the battle ahead? It is to operationalize a very strong law. And that is being done by the Panchayat Maha Okota, which is a collective of more than 1 lakh Panchayat members. And these Panchayat members are no longer illiterate people as they used to be in the past. We have PhDs, we have 95% of them have smartphones, we have a large number of them are graduates, and therefore they are now collectivizing and providing formidable opposition to MLAs. And I'm 100% sure that eventually rural decentralization will be actualized in Karnataka because of this process. And this has been a political process. But on the other hand, and this is a paradox, the legal landscape with respect to urban governance has been completely chaotic in Karnataka. The Karnataka Municipal Corporations Act, under which Bengaluru was 1976, under which Bengaluru was governed, was not revamped after the 74th Amendment. It just continued as the existing law. Unlike the rural law, where a new rural law was enacted in 1993, there was no new Urban Corporations Act enacted in 1993. The old act continued. Piecemeal and knee-jerk amendments to the law were added. It made the document equivalent to a sprawling slum on Bangalore city's outskirts. A disorganized document with several repetitions, provisions that ought to find a place in the rules rather than in the law. For example, the 1976 law, even today, contains provisions on smallpox. Smallpox has been completely eliminated, yet it has got elaborate provisions on smallpox. Even simple things like this were not removed. So the law became a very disorganized document, and it left nobody the wiser as to the roles and responsibilities of elected representatives, people's sabhas, and officials. Now, this paradox of Karnataka being a champion of rural decentralization and being completely neglecting urban decentralization. Do you know that Karnataka has never, not even on one occasion, since 1994, conducted the urban elections on time? Not even once. Karnataka, in fact, has mastered the art of not holding elections by the simple process of announcing a reorganization of urban areas just prior to the election. They did it when BMP became BBMP. They are doing it now, and courts have been completely powerless to stop it. Which also brings me to the next big problem, which is that courts are also quite ignorant of the 73rd and 74th Amendments. I might say that many years back, I was invited to a seminar in the National Judicial Academy and had the privilege of speaking about democratic decentralization at a seminar that was actually chaired by Justice Verma, who was retired Chief Justice of India, with Mr. Nariman sitting on one side. And I said more or less the same things, of course, in a kind of respectful way. And a person who later became the Chief Justice of India came up to me and candidly said that he knew nothing about all this, the significance of the 73rd and 74th Amendment. And this is supposed to be one of the most elaborate amendments in the Constitution after the 42nd Amendment and the 44th Amendment, which reversed much of the 42nd Amendment. They don't know about this. So what is happening is, this is also interwoven with the political economy and let me say something cynical but true about Karnataka. The neglect of urban decentralization, in my opinion, is driven by the imperatives of political ambition interwoven with corruption. For long, politicians in Karnataka have seen urban areas, and particularly the city of Bengaluru, as providing ample opportunity for accumulation of illegal wealth. Officials have often joined them in this endeavor. Not a single chief minister has been immune to allegations and scandals over urban governance. And I'm speaking even from the time of an ostensibly honest person such as Ramakrishna Hegde. There was a Revajitu scandal. There was a cooperative society scandal. And in fact, it led to his resignation, and ultimately he didn't return after his second term. There was president's rule, and Virendra Patil came to power. I think Virendra Patil was probably the only chief minister who did not have an urban scandal to his name, because a poor gentleman had a stroke and his term was ended prematurely. He had to leave and Bangarappa became the chief minister. So, not a single chief minister has been immune to allegations, and whether it is regarding handing over of contracts or changing land use regulations. Reconveying of land. You notify land for acquisition and then you amend the notification, which is not permitted